The French Revolution. The French society during the late 18th century. From 13th century onward, the France was ruled by the Bourbon family. In 1774, Louis XVI from the Bourbon family, he ascended the throne. He was just 20 years old. Upon his succession, he found the treasury was empty. The very first cause we are going to see is the economic cause. I will not mention what are the economic causes, social causes, but you will understand through the story. The long years of war drained the financial resources of the France. The cost of maintaining an extravagant court at immense palace of Versailles. The court was, very much extravagant, which was made up of the glaciers, the precious stone, and etc. Under Louis XVI, the France also helped the 13 American colonies to gain independence from the common enemy Britain. Remember, the France is not going to get anything in the return. It just want to take a revenge because the Britain is an enemy. The war added more than 2 billion livres of the debt. The livres is a currency which got discontinued in the year 1794. So France government was obliged to spend the increasing percentage of budget on paying interest payment alone. To meet its regular expenses, the state was forced to increase the taxes. But now who are going to pay the tax? Let's see the society in the 18th century. This was also called as the old regime. The society was divided into the three estates, the first estate, second estate, and third estate. The first estate was comprised of the clergy. The second estate was comprised of the nobility, which also enjoyed the feudal privileges. And third estate was comprised of the bourgeois class, that is big businessmen, lawyers, professors, peasants, land, less laborers, and etc. If you see the peasants were comprised of 90% of population, but they controlled very less amount of land, and around 60% of land was in the hand of first estate, second estate, and the rich person of the third estate. Now the entire tax burden was only on the third estate. The first two estates were tax exempted. The first estate, if you see, there was a clergy which was which was comprised of the priest, bishops, and the church officials. It was not only a religious institution, the church was also an economical and political institution and a social power center. The church also used to impose the tax called as the tithes, which was a 10% of agricultural produce. Remember, the old regime was actually a feudalism, a feudal system. In the feudal system, the entire land will be in the name of the king. The king will be delegating a land to the noble, and in turn, noble, what he will be doing? He'll be giving the lands to the peasant. The peasant has to cultivate the land, have to pay the rent, have to pay the services. Have to provide the services to the lords, have to pay the taxes, right? So this is a feudal system. In this feudal system, the peasants, they're not only paying the taxes to the state and the church, they're also providing the services to the lord whenever they were called. It is actually a forced labor. They have to provide an army service whenever called. They have to provide services such as the construction of the roads and etc. The second estate people were actually the rich elite class, the aristocrats, landlords, kings, close circles, etc. The state imposed a direct tax called as a tail and indirect taxes such as the salt, tobacco, and etc. Remember, king was not part of any of the estate. He was above all the three estates. In the NCERT, you will see a portrait of the spider and fly. The noble was represented with the spider and the poor was represented with the fly. Why this? Because generally the spider will catch a fly in its web and eats away, right? So here the noble is exploiting and the trapping a peasant in a web of feudal dues, taxes, and obligations. Before 1789, you will find the France followed the old regime, which is actually a political and social system where society was unequal and privileges were enjoyed by the clergy and nobility, while common people, they suffered the taxation and inequality. This is a social inequality. When talent is blocked by the birth-based privileges, the pressure builds for political change. And this idea later influences the concept of democracy, equality before law, and merit-based system. The French Revolution was not only a poor versus rich conflict, it was also an educated middle class versus privileged system. The middle class people started questioning why should birth decide rights? The next subtopic is the struggle to survive. The population of France rose from 23 million in 1715 to 28 million in 1789. The demand for food grain increased. There was a mismatch between the demand and supply. The price of the bread increased rapidly. The wages were fixed by the owner. The thing Things became even worse during the drought and hail when reduced the harvest, and this led to a subsistence crisis. It's an extreme situation where basic means of livelihood becomes endangered. This economic distress transformed the dissatisfaction into an anger against the monarchy. Growing middle class envisages an end to our privileges. The 18th century also saw the emergence of middle classes. For example, the merchants, they earned money or they became prosperous through overseas trade, and the educated classes, for example, lawyers, professors, and philosophers, right? Even they were seeing the oppressions and they started speaking for their rights. For example, the philosophers like John Locke, in his book The Two Treatises of Government, he sought to refute the doctrine of divinity and absolute right of monarch. If you see in the estate system, the king is above all the three estate, and he often used to say that I'm representing the god, and if you are going against the god will the punish you. It's a doctrine of divinity. The Rousseau, in his social contract book, wrote about agreement between the people and the ruler. We will see regarding the social contract in upcoming topics as well. Montesquieu, in his book The Spirit of Law, he had written about the separation of power, which is very important, like among the legislature, executive, and judiciary. The concentration of power often leads to dictatorship. Thus, this model of government was put forth into USA after 13 colonies declared their independence from the Britain. The ideas of philosophers, they were discussed intensively in salons and coffee houses, and these ideas were spread through the books and newspaper. During this time, when news came, the Louis XVI was planning to impose further taxes, and it generated anger and protest against the system of privileges. And then next topic is outbreak of revolution. To increase the tax, monarch had to call the meeting of the State General. Monarch alone cannot increase the tax. A State General is actually a political body to which three estates send their representatives. On 5th May 1789, Assembly of the Estate General was called in the resplendent hall in the Versailles. In the first estate, you will find the 300 representatives were sent. From second estate, 300 representatives. From third estate, the 600 representatives were sent. The first two estate people were sitting facing each other, but the third estate people stood at the back, and these were only prosperous, educated people. The poor and the women were denied their entry into the assembly, and their grievances were sent in the form of the letters. What was the system in the past? One system was having the one vote, but now the third estate people, they demanded that one person should have one vote, because one estate one vote means the nobility and the clergy will be favoring each other, and the majority of the votes will be going in the favor of them. So they wanted one person, one vote. It's a very democratic principle put forwarded by the Rousseau in his book, The Social Contract. Now, it was rejected by the monarch. They walked out of the assembly and they assembled in the hall of the Indo Tennis Court on 20th June. They declared themselves National Assembly. They swore to draft a constitution which is going to limit the power of the king. It was led by the Mirabeau, who is actually coming from a noble family. He was against the feudal system. Abbé Sieyès, he is actually a priest. He wrote a pamphlet, What is the Third Estate? Now you will see the people who are coming even from the first estate and second estate, they are against the unfair system and they're actually supporting the third estate people. Well, National Assembly was busy at Versailles drafting a constitution. What was happening in the rest of the France? The France was undergoing a turmoil of chaos. By chaos, a severe winter reduced the harvest. It led to the increase in the price. The baker often exploited the situation by hoarding the supplies. Now, if you see, for waging a war, generally for a war, men will be fighting a war at the front. So who will be left? The women will be left to earn, and women have to take care of the families, right? So after spending long hours in the long queues at the bakery, the crowds of angry women, they stormed the shop. At the same time, even king ordered the troops to enter into the Paris. On 14th July, agitated crowd, they stormed and destroyed the Bastille. The Bastille is actually a prison in the France. This is happening in the urban area. If you see in the rural area, that is countryside, the rumors were spreading from village to village that the lords of manor had hired the bands of brigands to destroy the ripened crops. The angry or the frustrated peasants, they attacked on the chateau, which is actually a residence of the noble. They looted the hoarded grains. They burned out the document which was having the feudal dues. Faced with the power of revolting subject, the Louis XVI finally accorded recognition of National Assembly and accepted the principle that his power now be checked by the Constitution. The fall of Bastille marked the collapse of royal authority in public imagination. The Bastille stood for the symbol of despotism. If anybody criticizes the government, they were imprisoned. France became a constitutional monarchy. National Assembly completed the draft of the Constitution in 1791. It limited the power of the king, and it also divided the power among the judiciary, executive, and legislature. But what is the limitation of 1791? It gave the power, right to vote only to the active citizens. The active citizens are those who are about 25 years of age, the 25 or more, and who can pay the 3 days of laborer wage. And they in turn elected, voted for the electors. The electors in turn voted for the legislatures, who are actually National Assembly people. And the legislature and electors, they should be from the highest tax bracket. The legislature in turn elected the executive, and the active citizens directly voted for the judiciary. The rest were passive citizens, the remaining men and the women. You will see the women will be sidelined every time. The constitution began with the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Here also you will not find the women, you will find man and citizen. The constitution, it recognized the right to life, freedom of speech and expression, the equality before law, and etc. These are all the natural and inalienable right which cannot be taken away from any person. And it was the duty of a state to protect each citizen's natural rights. But equality was still incomplete as women and the poor citizen lacked the voting rights. France abolishes monarchy and becomes a republic. Why France abolishes the monarchy and it becomes a republic? The king Louis XVI, he was not happy, right? He was having a conspiracies with the neighboring countries or the neighboring monarch, to regain his power. Even the neighboring countries were not happy because this domino effect or the development which is taking place in the France may also will be having a effect or the impact in the neighboring countries or the citizens of the neighboring countries, and hence these monarch countries will be trying to send their troops. But before this could happen, the National Assembly voted in April 1792 to declare war against the Prussia and Austria. They also composed a patriotic song, the La Marseillaise. Marseille is again a city in the France. Now it is also a national anthem of the France. Revolutionary wars brought economic difficulties. Men, they were engaged in fighting war at the front, and the women, they were left to earn and look after their families. As Constitution of 1791 recognized only richer classes, the political clubs became important because here the people discussed government policies and planned their own forms of action. And one of the most successful club was the Jacobin Club. It was named after a convent, a religious building of the Saint Jacobin. The members were of less prosperous class. Their leader was Maximilian Robespierre. They wore long striped trousers, which was also called as the sans culottes, means those without knee breeches, because the noble family used to wear the knee breeches to differentiate themselves from the nobility. They wore the long striped trousers. They also wore red cap, which symbolized the liberty. The summer of 1792, the Jacobins planned insurrection, the violent uprising, because there was a food shortage and there was inflation. On August 10, they stormed the palace of Tuileries, they massacred king guards, they imprisoned royal family, and again elections were held. Men above 21, all men above 21, irrespective of the property, they got right to vote. Again, women right to vote was denied. The newly elected assembly was called as the convention. On 21st September 1792, they abolished the monarchy and declared the France as the republic. Louis XVI, he was sentenced to death by the court on the charge of treason, that is betraying the nation, and executed publicly. Why to execute publicly? Because it symbolized the rejection of absolute monarchy, and then later even the Marie Antoinette faced the same fate. The Reign of Terror, 1793 to 94. Why we are calling Reign of Terror? Because the fear ruled the society. People were feared of arrest, execution, and accusations. The leader of the Jacobin Club, the Robespierre, he followed the extreme revolutionary control through fear. He suspected enemies were executed. Strict laws and surveillance was imposed. The guillotine was widely used. He brought the equality bread concept, like white flour cannot be consumed by any person. Everybody has to consume the same bread, the same wheat, same flour. Robespierre guillotine, because of his extreme policies, he was guillotined by his own member club. The views of Desmoulins and Robespierre believed that liberty could be protected only through a strong force. But according to Desmoulins, the liberty meant protecting individual rights and limiting the state oppression. Directory rules France. The fall of Jacobin government allowed the wealthier middle class to seize the power. They brought a new constitution which denied the voting power to the non-prosperous class, and they elected two legislative council, which in turn appointed a directory consisting of 5 members of executive. And this directory and the legislative council, had a clashes often, and this led to a political instability, paving the way to rise of the military dictator called as Napoleon Bonaparte. Did women have a revolution? Of course. The Olympe de Gouges is one of the women who got executed because he favored the women, and she. Olympe de Gouges, she favored the women. She also brought the Declaration of Rights of Women. The women were reduced to the passive citizens. To discuss their interests, around 60 clubs came up in different cities of the France. One of the famous was the Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women. Because of this political club, in the early years, the revolutionary government did introduce the laws which helped to improve the lives of women. For example, school education was made compulsory, divorce was made legal, the women were trained for the jobs and etc. But again, the right to vote was again a dream. Fight for the vote was carried out through an international suffrage movement during the late 19th century and early 20th century, and finally in 1946, the right to vote was given to the women of France. The abolition of slavery, the most revolutionary social reform under the Jacobin regime. In 17th century, you will see the triangular slave trade. The Europeans were very much reluctant to go to the Caribbean and work, and they found an alternative that they started purchasing the slaves from local chieftains of Africa. They branded the slaves and they tightly packed the slaves into ships. It took around 3 months. So they are moving from, moving through the Atlantic Ocean and they are reaching Caribbean over here. The plantation is taking place over here. The sugar, indigo, coffee, whatever they required, now it is being transported or exported to the France, which is in the Europe. This is called as a triangular slave trade. National Assembly had the long debates but did not pass any law because they were afraid of the opposition from the businessmen. The Convention of 1794, it legislated to free all slaves, but it was very short-term measure because later Napoleon will be reintroducing the slavery, and the slavery finally abolished in the French colonies in 1848. Revolution and everyday life. After, the French Revolution brought the concept of equality, fraternity, liberty, and now the state government, even the state government itself was involved in abolition of censorship. The idea of liberty, justice was widespread, started spreading in the form of plays, songs, and festive procession who could not read and understand the text of philosophers. Conclusion. In 1804, the Napoleon, he became an emperor. He brought a laws to protect private property, uniform system of weights and measures in decimal form. Initially, many saw him as the liberator, but soon Napoleonic army weaved everywhere as invading forces because the Napoleon started conquering and he conquering the neighboring countries, the neighboring monarch countries, and started placing his own family members. Because if he places his own family members, there will be no chaos, and entire Europe can be, controlled by the Napoleon. The 1815 Battle of Waterloo. Waterloo is actually in the Belgium. He was defeated by the France and Prussian army. The French Revolution not only inspired the rest of the Europe, but also inspired India and, in fact, the whole world. Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Tipu Sultan, they responded to the ideas coming from the revolutionary France. The chapter is completed. Thank you.